This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This episode is brought to you by the team at the Real Soil Company. Launched to the market in 2020, the Real Soil Company proudly offers new organic, peat-free SuperSoil. Packed full of organic nutrients for optimal plant health, SuperSoil's natural boosters will stimulate quicker plant establishment and better resilience against pests and diseases, whilst also enabling edible crops to benefit from nutritional enhancement and a higher crop yield. The enhanced soil also offers better water retention and release for optimum plant growth, whilst providing a more balanced and workable material for gardeners. As a special offer for listeners, the Real Soil Company is offering 5% off all orders of its new SuperSoil throughout May and June 2021. Simply visit the link in the show notes and enter the code ROOTSANDALL5, all uppercase, at the checkout. This week I'm speaking to Senior Arboricultural Research Manager Glynn Percival, who works for Bartlett Tree Experts. I first heard Glynn speak about 7 years ago, and I was blown away by his straight talking and the research he presented that day, which exploded many myths about tree planting. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that his eye-opening lecture was a pivotal moment in my understanding that I didn't have to swallow all the received wisdom surrounding horticulture. I began by asking Glynn about what he does at Bartlett Tree Experts.
Yes, my main area of research over the past few years has really been trying to look at ways and means of dealing with all this huge influx of pests and diseases that are currently attacking our trees. I mean, I think we're all familiar with ash dieback, which is estimated to kill 98 to 99% of our ash trees. But we also have other issues such as acute oak decline and sudden oak death. But I like to think where we differ in our approach to managing these problems is rather than rely on conventional systems, which rely heavily on chemicals or pesticides, which are either sprayed or trunk injected, we actually use a concept known as induced resistance. And it's actually very similar to the COVID vaccinations. Is what we do is we've been applying a number of products to trees that work by boosting their immune system. And many of these products we've been trialing are soil applied. So, for example, a very common one we use is known as Biochar. Biochar is a very purified form of charcoal. And when we apply it to the ground, it not only improves the soil structure and therefore root growth, which kind of also helps enhance the health of the tree, as it were. It also kind of switches on tree defense systems, because we always forget a really important question, and which is, what makes a successful disease a successful disease? Why does ash dieback, for example, kill only ash trees? Why doesn't it kill oak trees? And why does sudden oak death only kill oak trees and not other species? And one of the means by which these diseases work is they can attack a tree without the tree knowing. So by applying biochar, it in essence just switches on the tree defense systems. Another product which is commercially available, and you can actually buy them as fertilizers, are chitin based products. And chitin is it's really derived from waste kind of seafood products, shells, crab shells, lobster shells, prawn shells, which are ground up and purified and used as a fertilizer, and that will switch on tree defense systems. There are other ones as well. And as I say, the beauty of the system is that by applying the product to the soil, then really it kind of negates all the issues you have with conventional pest and disease management, which is really spray programs. So in a nutshell, that's really what we're doing, and with great success. We are actually having some very, very good results.
I will definitely come back to the biochar later, actually. But I heard you say recently during a talk that tree pests and diseases are on the increase. Why might that be?
I think it's a number of issues. Really, we do have problems with biosecurity. And, one of the dilemmas is trees can be what we call asymptomatic, which means they have the disease but show absolutely no symptoms whatsoever. So when trees arrive in the country and they are inspected, and, in some cases, maybe sadly not quarantined, but they have the disease, it's not detected. And then with time, the disease becomes, visibly apparent. The other issue we have as well, and, we really are seeing a quite a marked change in our climate. I mean, 2018, 2019, and we forget in 2020, April and May were the warmest, driest pretty much on record. And these extremes in climate really are stressing out our trees. And as a result of that, they just become inherently weaker. And not only does it mean that they're susceptible to this ingress of new pests and diseases, but also existing ones we've had for many years. We're finding a huge increase in severity and frequency. So they're just some of the reasons, as I say, this impact of, we bring in trees from abroad and maybe the diseases aren't manifest, coupled with the fact that very few nurseries, in fact, I'm only aware of one actually quarantines their trees. And I think this is a major mistake. We really should be looking at quarantine trees.
You were talking about the chemicals and how they can switch on tree defences. How would you deliver those chemicals? Is it purely through the soil? Do you use any other methods at all?
No, the beauty of the system is say the concept we use is this induced resistance. It's actually systemic induced resistance, which means you can apply it to the roots. And I mean, we're kind of talking real, bucket chemistry here. You can simply apply the products as a dilute solution. You can add them as a soil amendment. You can dig them in, or if you want, you can spray. But you don't need to actually spray the entire tree, because once you switch on those defense systems, so for example, if you apply it to the roots, you switch on the defense systems at the roots. This becomes then manifest throughout the entire tree. It also switches on the defense systems within the tree trunk and within the canopy, and vice versa. If you were to spray a portion of the tree, say the lower canopy, this would then switch on the defense systems in the higher canopy and then be transmitted throughout the tree trunk and into the root system. So it's in terms of application, it's very straightforward. And there's recently some new products where you can actually spray the bark and it will take the product in through the bark. So so whatever works for you, whatever you would find easiest, either drenching the root system or just spraying the foliage of the plants.
And when you say it switches on the tree defences, it made me think, does it switch them on and then do they stay on permanently? And if so, does that exhaust the tree?
Well, there's been a lot of research done with this induced resistance. And what you find, it normally switches it on for pretty much for one growing season. So you would have to apply. So it's not like a one-off treatment. For example, if you were to use these chitin fertilizers, you would need to use them annually. And there is a little bit of a trade-off, because when you cause this switch on defense systems within trees, it requires energy. So there is a reduction in growth. I mean, not a huge reduction, anything from 5 to 15%. So you might not quite get as much growth as you want. Or on another case, you might actually want the trees to slow down their growth, and it works beneficially from that point of view. So that's kind of the only trade-off. And I did touch on this biochar, and as I say, one of the advantages of biochar is once applied to the soil, it actually does take a long time to degrade. I mean, some people have estimated it at thousands of years. So one of the advantages of biochar is that is the one product we have at the moment that would switch on those defense systems on an annual basis over hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah, that's interesting, because talking of doing, very low-key experiments, I actually bought some biochar compost, and I found that it made my plants actually deficient in nutrients. And then I interviewed somebody else for the podcast from a company called Earthly Biochar. And they said, actually, what you need to do is charge the biochar with nutrients before you apply it. Have you had any experience of that?
Yes, I mean, that is actually a very good point. I mean, and what we tend to do is it is always worth charging the biochar. And it really depends on what your objective is. So, for example, if you knew pest and disease were going to be a major problem, then I would recommend charging the biochar with one of these chitin-based products, which you can buy in liquid form. There's another product which is also excellent for switching on tree defense systems, known as potassium phosphite. And the key word here is phosphite, not phosphate. And again, you can buy that as a solution, and then you can literally just soak the biochar in the phosphites, and that would switch on the defense systems. If you wanted lots and lots of growth, then obviously just kind of charge the biochar with something like a general liquid nitrogen-based fertilizer. So it really depends what what your objective is. If you've got fruit trees and you want lots of fruit, then obviously I would recommend something like a dilute nitrogen NPK-based fertilizer. If it was defense, then obviously go with the chitin or the phosphites.
Yeah. I went to a talk that you gave a while ago, and you were talking about the research that you were doing into feeding trees with sugar. Can you talk about the findings of that?
Yes, we've had some great results, and it sounds a very strange concept to why should we apply sugar to trees, and without getting too geeky and sciencey, it's when trees really do feed themselves through the process of photosynthesis, and the end product of photosynthesis is sugar. But when trees are really under chronic stress, then what happens is the stomatas close and you can't get any carbon dioxide into the leaf. So basically photosynthesis just starts to close down. And we thought, well, maybe to a degree, if the tree is really heavily under stress, by applying dilute sugars, we could kind of put the tree on life support. And really where this work stemmed from, when I was involved in a spate of herbicide poisoning, and sadly not everybody likes trees, and there was a number of cases where the trees have been poisoned with a herbicide, and all herbicides work either directly or indirectly by kind of destroying the leaf photosynthetic system. So we first started applying the sugars to really put the tree on life support. So while the herbicide broke down within the tree, the sugars kept the tree alive. And that's really where the work stemmed from. And then at a later date, we found that when you plant a tree, most trees that you buy from the nurseries tend to have very little mycorrhizae. And mycorrhizae are very beneficial, what we call symbiotic fungi. And one of the ways by which trees attract mycorrhizae to their root system in nature is by secreting sugars. So obviously, if we apply dilute solutions of sugar, then what we found is we actually did speed up the mycorrhizal process, the kind of root mycorrhizae association. So we were finding that applying sugars had a number of benefits. We were stimulating mycorrhizae, and we were kind of helping the tree through intense periods of stress, and particularly, as I say, where we found ourselves in this horrendous scenario where a tree had been maliciously poisoned with a herbicide.
And it's fascinating research. And also, I know you do a lot with mulch, and I wondered if it matters what you mulch a tree with, and also if you've done any research into how thick a mulch should be.
Yes, another great question. You see, when I do my research, I always try to look at, trees to me really should be, self-sufficient. And it's only really when they're struggling a bit that we kind of need to step in and help them out. And one of the most simplest and effective systems of really helping a tree improve its health is really to apply a thick, when I say thick, a layer of wood chip mulch to a depth of between 5 and 10 centimeters. And I mean, the use of wood chip mulch as a way of enhancing tree health has been recognized for, at least 100 years. And it's really beneficial. It fertilizes the tree, it suppresses weeds, it keeps the soil moisture content. And what we've been doing with our research is a little bit different. And again, it links into this induced resistance. It was really, we wanted to know, are all mulches created equal? So, for example, is a mulch made purely from cherry better than a mulch made purely from oak, better than a mulch made purely from hawthorn? And what we found is there actually is quite a big difference on the type of mulch. And we use the term single species mulch, which is quite unique. I think we're the only people, the only researchers looking at this. But I kind of mentioned the sugars, and fruit trees are by nature inherently high in sugar. So if we were in a situation where we wanted to improve tree health and stimulate root systems and improve mycorrhizae, we found that by applying a mulch made purely from apple or pear or cherry is wonderful. It will give those benefits and we use fresh mulch. We don't need to compost, not with deciduous trees. We will literally chip up the pear, the apple, the cherry, make the mulch, and apply it fresh. And all these sugars leach into the soil and then start to enhance the mycorrhizae. The other type of mulch we're really very interested in is mulch made from willow. And the reason why is the Latin name for willow is silex, because they're very high in salicylic acid. And salicylic acid, we know better of aspirin. Salicylic acid is also one of these, it's what we call an elicitor. It's what switches on tree defense systems. It's a very powerful compound that will really switch on tree defense systems. So our research over the past few years has focused on looking at wood chip mulch made purely from willow. And I did have my brief 15 minutes of fame when we talked about this on Country File. And what we found is combinations of biochar and a mulch made solely from willow. We've had some, really excellent results, particularly with ash dieback. So we're finding this quite exciting. And what we're doing now is we're looking at different species of willow, because we have recently found that the salicylic acid content in red, the red stemmed willow, the Silex daphnoides, is literally 3-4 times higher than the salicylic acid in the white willow. And so that's where we will be going with this research. So yeah, it's all new. It's all quite exciting. And to me, what I find most useful about it is we are really finding these systems, these biochar, the phosphites, this willow mulch really does help our trees, with these ash dieback, this acute oak decline, this sudden oak death. So yes, that's where we are with this research at the moment.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a kind of upper limit as to the levels of salicylic acid before it becomes, detrimental, I suppose. And also I wondered, do you know, has research been done into the levels of salicylic acid in different willows? Do you know that, or is that something you're having to discover as well?
No, we've literally, we did that very recently. So we now have a database. We looked at the 12 most commonest willows in the UK and we analysed their salicylic acid content. So we actually have that data. We haven't published it, but what I can tell you is the white willows, the corkscrew willows, the weeping willows, they are the ones that have the lowest salicylic acid. But we are finding the yellow stem, the orange stem, and particularly the red stem, they're normally 2 to 4 times higher in salicylic acid. Hence, they're the ones we're going to take forward into our research trials. Because it is a very valid point. I mean, if the salicylic acid content is too high, it may actually be detrimental to trees. Most of my research is focused solely with the white willows, where we've had very good results. So fingers crossed, the yellow, the orange, the red barked willow where the salicylic acid is higher, hopefully will give us even better results, but without damaging the health of the tree.
Yeah, I mean, you have to wonder, obviously all these trees have different chemicals in them. There's probably a use for all of them, but we just don't know it yet.
No, I agree entirely. I mean, the whole field to me is just so exciting. As I say, the chemical makeup of every single tree species will be different. And I say chemicals, we refer to them as allelochemicals, because if you think where most of our pharmaceuticals, our medicines, our drugs are derived from, it's from plants. So, the fact that we're kind of using this, this system, we may find that with time there is potentially what I call a super wood chip mulch out there, which might be derived from, I don't know, maybe one of these ornamental species of maple. We just don't know yet. But each year, what we do in our research trials is we take, individual species, and then we kind of chip them up. And then we look at different tree species, look at which ones really enhance transplant survival, look at the ones which are really good at helping trees defend themselves against pests and diseases, because we do have access to a lot of fruit orchards, and anyone who grows fruit will tell you quite quickly if you have the wrong variety, you will struggle massively with apple scab. So, and we also actually, the rose growers think we're crazy when we actually buy in variety of roses, which are incredibly prone to black spot. But for us, it's a great kind of rose to use, because we can plant the roses in pots, then apply these different wood chip mulches, and then measure the extent of disease severity by simply counting up the number of leaves that have black spot and then measuring their length and diameter. So yeah.
Oh, have you ever found a mulch that stops black spot on roses?
Well, we've only really just moved into roses, because I say we are primarily a tree company, but a lot of our clients do have roses, and it's the first question we get. And I would like to emphasize, even though I'm talking about the wood chip mulch and its effect on trees, this induced resistance, it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's the same concept applies. So these phosphites, the biochar, would work as wonderfully well with shrubs, with bedding plants, with allotment vegetables.
Wow, that's amazing. Just as you say, it's very exciting. I was going to talk very briefly as well about the. I saw you give a talk the other week, and you were saying about scented plants and their effects on tree health, and you kind of added it as a little bit at the end, because I think probably it is quite undiscovered. But it sounds really interesting. Can you mention about that?
Yes, it really went, I have an allotment. I love growing vegetables, and you ask anyone who grows vegetables, and people always say, well, if you plant tagetes and marigolds, for example, beneath the tomatoes, then you don't really get as many pests and diseases attacking the tomatoes. And the reason what people thought was happening was the marigolds and the tagetes were bringing in the bees, the pollinators, which were acting as biocontrol agents. But what we're actually finding now is what also is happening is many of these heavily scented plants, such as jasmine, for example, the actual scent, what you smell is a chemical. So let's just take jasmine. When you smell jasmine, what you're smelling is jasmonic acid. And jasmonic acid has been shown to be a very powerful, chemical that switches on tree defense systems. So what we've been doing is really looking at a lot of these flowering shrubs and flowering plants. And it sounds really strange, but that's the great thing about doing research. I get access to lots of research students. So sometimes you can kind of do little bit things that are weird and wonderful. So we've been looking at like hanging baskets in trees, because of course, when the flowers come out and they give off their scent is a chemical. And we're seeing which ones switch on tree defense systems, and we're doing a lot of work looking at understory of shrubs under, where you have an area under the tree which may be prone to pests and diseases. So by planting some of these flowering shrubs actually under the tree. As I say, they come into flowers, switch on the tree defense systems. And we've been doing a lot of work of this nature with Kew Gardens, which is great. But again, my own observational experience, I go on a lot of properties, and if you go onto properties, you tend to find where jasmine, for example, is planted, you rarely find surrounding plants struggle with any forms of pests and diseases. But this is just an ad hoc observation. And we have noticed in areas where that have understories in woodlands where ash trees have all the wild garlic, we have noticed that the severity of ash dieback tends to be less. And we know garlic, again, has been used for many, many years for medicinal purposes. And it's also very good. It does form the basis of some of these organic kind of fungicides and bactericides, which are commercially available. So it's all new. It's all quite exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. If you kind of had any advice to pass on to home gardeners at the moment, specifically with regards to their trees, is there anything that you think they should look out for? What could they do to kind of encourage tree health, given, where with the situation that we're in with the weather and everything else?
I would really say if there was only one thing, anyone listening could do to improve the health of the trees or the shrubs, it really is a wood chip mulch. It doesn't have to be from willow or pear or cherry. Any wood chip mulch will really have huge benefits. It's the most simplest, cost-effective, thing that you can do to improve tree and shrub vitality. Just mulch. And in a perfect world, and, ideally, if you have a big tree, mulch to the drip line and if you can, 1 meter beyond. But sometimes in the UK, people have a bit of a love affair with grass, which is fine. So we always say, as a minimum, if you have a tree, just take the diameter of the tree at chest height. And then what we normally say is 3 times diameter at chest height. So if the diameter of the tree is 0.5 meter, then ideally have a wood chip mulch to at least 1.5 meters.
Bartlett Tree Experts is a global company doing really interesting research that's of benefit to everything from large-scale agriculture to domestic gardens. And their website's full of freely accessible material, so do go and check it out. I'd like to say a really big thank you to Glynn for the interview. I know he's busy, and also thank you for inspiring me to ask more questions. Thanks to you for listening. Please also go and check out this episode's sponsors, the Real Soil Company. They're offering 5% off all orders of their new SuperSoil throughout May and June 2021. Visit the link in the show notes and enter the code ROOTSNOR5 at the checkout. I'll leave you with Dr. Ian Bedford, talking about a butterfly that, if you're lucky, you may have spotted already this year.
There's always going to be debate as to when we should officially acknowledge the arrival of spring. Meteorologically speaking, it's 1/4 of a 12-month cycle, which starts on the 1st of March and ends on the last day of June. But astronomically speaking, it begins around the 20th of March at the equinox, then ends on the 21st of June on summer solstice. Most gardeners, though, will have their own way of deciding when spring has arrived, whether it's the sight of a certain flower, the sound of a certain creature, or the smell of a certain fragrance. But for me, being a typical old entomologist, spring has arrived when I first see a certain insect in my garden, an orange-tip butterfly. And that's because it's one of the very few insect species that's totally dependent on springtime conditions for completing the active stages of its life cycle. And it begins each year when signals from nature inform the orange tips that winter has finally passed, and they can now start to hatch out from their chrysalises. Unfolding their wings and taking to the air, these medium-sized white butterflies with their mottled green underwings are unmistakable during spring, especially the males with their bright orange wingtips, and they're frequently seen amongst hedgerows and gardens, searching for nectar, and hedge garlic and cuckoo flower plants, the cruciferous wildflowers that their caterpillars eat, and where the adult butterflies must lay their eggs. Laid singly, the eggs soon hatch into little green caterpillars that feed on the leaves until late spring. Then when mature, they move to the stems of the food plants, where, after attaching themselves with a tiny silk girdle, they shed their skins and become chrysalises. It's now quite a risky time for the orange tips though, since these chrysalises have to remain safe on the plants right the way through until the following spring, avoiding predators and also the threat that their host plants might be cleared and destroyed. But if all goes well, it's inside the chrysalis that the remarkable biological process called metamorphosis occurs. The process where all the internal organs of the former caterpillar are digested by enzymes and converted into a protein-rich soup that contains some very special cells called imaginal cells, which then grow within the soup, forming structures and organs that eventually complete the magical transformation from larva to adult. And within the orange tips chrysalises, their metamorphosis continues throughout the summer months, when we most expect to see butterflies flying, and on into autumn and winter. But each year, it reliably ensures that the orange-tip butterflies will be ready to hatch and to herald the arrival of the following spring.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.